Hi, I'm Pronago, and joining me for this big boys table is IskatuMesk.
Smoke weed every day.
As you can probably hear, behind both of our audio is a lot of fan noise because it's hot.
It's very hot. Anyone who told you Canada is cold is a filthy liar.
Well, speaking of heat, it's also hot in hell. So let's travel there with Doom 2016.
I thought you were going to say Warcraft 3. That would have been true hell. But at least we have Designer Dave to hold our hand through it.
You should just have Designer Dave's audio playing in the background while you're doing a Let's Play of that game. So we're going to be talking about Doom 2016 in this podcast. Basically, one of the only shooters with any degree of promise or fun that I've had with in quite a while, but it's obviously not without its flaws. Mesk recently completed a Let's Play of it, so we're going to talk about just stuff related to it and why it fell apart, mostly. So I guess we can start with just the gameplay itself, which is probably the most interesting bit, and we can sort of spiral out from there. Obviously, it has pretty decent gunplay. If anybody's played the game, they'll more or less know that it doesn't suffer from a lot of the same issues as the other gameplay loops, where you have problems like, constantly having to duck behind cover and all this other stuff, but it makes up for it with QuickTime events. So it's not like it really completely removed that evil. It just used a different one. So I guess we'll just break down the way that the game works now, and then we can go into like what might work for alternatives or whatever. So in your estimation, what do you think was the, what were some of the more limiting factors of the game?
Well, the game really didn't actually try to be Doom. It just used the name Doom, and it was more like the newer Resident Evil movies than like Doom. There's a lot of all-American retardation, just like my speech, because I'm Canadian and thus some American retardation going on. So, for example, when you're low on health, you have the entire screen goes red tinted, the health bar flashes red, and then you get idiot text saying low health. This is like just one example, but basically the entire game is like this. The armor upgrades and everything that are just glowing bright green and blue. Yes, I'm going to be even more illiterate today because my brain is actually putting. So basically, Doom 2016, or New Doom, has, as you said, reasonable gunplay behind it. The controls are reasonable. I'm pretty sure they copy-pasted it from a older canned project within the company library, as is often the case, like with what Blizzard does or other companies. They have some alpha that they hack together. Well, this one just turned out to have pretty decent controls. So the gun handling and everything like that is much more responsive than most of the games I've played within the last pretty much ever in terms of shooters. I haven't done a lot of Let's Plays of shooters, but I did play a lot of Halo PC and stuff back in the day. I did play a lot of Unreal Tournament, so I still had quite a bit of memories to go by from competitive shooters, and a little bit of Counter-Strike as well. So this kind of stood up to those in terms of the player feedback, but that's kind of where it ends. So other than it really not being Doom, other than having the name and stuff copy pasted off of it, the game flow is really fucked up. Not even just because of QuickTime events. Like, the QuickTime events were thrown in just because every American game has QuickTime events, because I don't really think there is an actual reason why. People just don't know how to design games, apparently. But the other thing is that the design is really bad. So I haven't played the original Doom. I've seen it way back when I was young, and that is a play I intend to get to, so I'll be able to do a more accurate comparison later down the line. But just coming in from like my previous shooter experience, the level design for New Doom felt really awful, because you just have big glowing armor and ammo and health just strewn about everywhere, particularly in places where it doesn't make any sense. Now, they're trying to make a her definition cinematic shooter, And I'm going to get into that her definition thing later because it really deserves some special mention just how bad the graphics are in this game. To the point that Bethesda was DMCAing every possible screenshot and video they could get their hands on during its pre-release because it was going to show how bad that game actually was and people weren't going to buy it. But the gameplay pattern is really bad because, well, the general theme is that you're the Doom guy, and a part of it is that this is a sequel to the other games, and hell knows you as this legendary figure that came in and slaughtered everything, including their Dark Titan, Amon. So you voided everyone, and then you got sealed away by the priest or something like that. So, of course, when you waltz through hell, there's just mountains of armor and ammo and health in these strings. Just everywhere you go, between every single room. And, yeah, there's a clash. There's definitely kind of a clash. Now, of course, I played Unreal Tournament. I know all about arcade and multiplayer map design and weapon placement and ammo placement. None of it really tends to be that realistic at all. But those are never tried to be portrayed as realistic games. They're not going for that her definition, hyper-realistic 4D her graphics with the cinematic storyline and the quick-time events and everything. It's literally just here's multiplayer maps, guns spawn here and here and here. Your map control is a huge part of the gameplay. Keeping track of the spawn points for the armor and health is a big part of it. Of course, this is a single-player game. We have none of that stuff. But they didn't try to make it at least appear like the stuff belonged here, especially in the later half of the game. They really just stopped caring altogether. And it's hell, and it looks bad, and stuff is just strewn out right in front of you wherever you go, and it's just like nobody gave a shit. I can still kind of look past that. The actual gameplay interactions were good, but they weren't. So I played on the highest available difficulty when I started, which I believe was Nightmare. It was actually the easiest shooter I've ever played.
Ultra-violence.
Yeah, ultra-violence. There you go. That's it. I can't remember. They're all the same. Nightmare... HKS actually did some research after I finished the run and said there didn't really actually seem to be any concrete information on what Nightmare actually does. But the upper end difficulty, I think, makes you have to restart the game if you die. So that's not really a difficulty at all.
No, what? That's fucking retarded. What? If that's real, that's like... Can we talk about locking difficulty settings away from people before they complete the game,
really
by the way?
stupid.
Like,
but I mean, when you think about it, like most of the difficulty settings in games these days, all they do is just make stats higher. So they're not even really difficulty settings to begin with.
yeah, but then there's no content either. Like, first of all, I don't understand the allure of what New Game Plus is supposed to provide. Like, oh, I played the game, now I can play through it, and it's easier. Like, what?
Yeah.
But, so, I don't even know if you get New Game Plus and New Doom, but all I know is that playing through the campaign once is all you need to do. Also, I do like the fact that there is actually a play the campaign button that's not the play campaign button. The menu is really bad and loads really poorly.
It is bad. Like, in order to get into the game settings to change your graphics and audio and stuff, you have to actually go into the campaign and go into a save slot, and then there's the settings button. You get 4, count them, 4 separate loading screens when you start the fucking game.
Yeah.
Like, the UI in this is absolutely abhorrent. All the graphics in this are abhorrent. The sound design is actually some of the worst of any game I've ever played.
Well, just looking at the way that...
so hyper-compressed.
Like, what prevents you from actually launching the campaign mode? There's a lot of stuff, actually. Like, think about it. You have to launch the game, which is like 2 or 3 loading screens by itself. Then you have to click one of the 2 available campaign buttons. And then you gain access to your settings after you decide to, like, start a new game or whatever. Which is really flabbergasting. I guess it's not quite as bad as a 20,000-year-old game Brood War where you have to launch the game before you can open up the options menu. But at that point, I don't know, man.
It was just, ugh. Yeah, it was bad. The UI was terrible all throughout the game. And,
well, there's also, like, really basic shit, like, not, like, defaulting to...
I got a BRB.
Okay. There's also really basic shit in that game with the UI, like defaulting to not the correct resolution and having just all sorts of dumb settings ticked on by default, probably VSync, but just every other thing that, and everybody who knows what this stuff does, they disable it immediately, like the excess motion blur and There's like certain, oh yeah, chromatic subsampling or something like that. Like there's shit that lowers your frame rate, adds increased load to your game, and doesn't actually provide anything but more of a mess when it comes to trying to read the game itself. And if you're going to be playing on a high difficulty, then presumably what you're trying to do then is, well, I don't know. At that point, you're trying to like actually play the game and not be able to see stuff. And then, hey Chris, I see you in the chat there. You said that you haven't played it on ultra settings. I think that this sort of feeds back into some of the settings being set to a certain point. I mean, it's a console port, so upgrading the settings isn't going to actually change too much between like high settings and ultra or whatever. There's really not that much of a difference, and you're mostly just going to be upgrading in a sense where you're just adding more post-processing filters to your game. So you have a situation now where you have something along the lines of, I want to say that there's at least 4 post-processing filters that I saw Mesk disable in his run that I also disabled in my run. So there's like more than that you can disable, but the fact that there's that many things of like that many layers of it that do nothing but obscure the pre-processed image that you see on your screen if you disable them all. It's like, why didn't they just put the effort and money into like the licensing for whatever middleware or whatever that they ended up using for that? Why didn't they just put those resources into designing a better end product so you didn't need the post-processing? That doesn't even really make sense, but I'm sure we'll get into that later on when Mesk gets back. Outside of the really bad UI and the really long loading times, which I think is like inexcusable, honestly, in a non-console environment where, like, in a console environment, when you're developing for a console, you obviously have like a certain amount of specifications for your hardware that aren't going to change unless like maybe there's a new version of the console that comes out or something like that. That's been shown to happen quite a lot, actually, I guess lately. But for the most part, you know your baseline, you know what's going to be the bare minimum setting, so you can sort of design around that. But presumably you have PC tests because you're testing on a PC and not on a console. At least that's usually how most of this stuff is done. People obviously develop with a console, or rather, they develop with using a PC, obviously. So they're going to be testing internal builds on a PC, and so that should allow you to like build your game in such a way where you want it to perform well on the PC, so that you can make efficient use of your testing time. But I guess that isn't what happened here. So when it comes to Doom itself, obviously, like I said, the redeeming qualities are its controls and its gunplay, but there's a lot of stuff that takes away from that experience. So again, harken back to when we were just talking about the UI and how you have to spend a lot of unnecessary energy just getting into the campaign mode, just to enable your settings, just to do all of these basic things that on most other games are available just right out of the ground up. Like, oh, I started the game and there's an options menu. Oh, I started the game and it didn't take 10 minutes to load or whatever. So how are you going to compare that to Doom? Well, obviously your experience is automatically going to be worse because you have to spend all this unnecessary energy. And then you get into the campaign mode itself, and in order to actually get all of the, like, enough of the guns for a real variety, you don't have to play for too long. Like, it's about maybe, I would say, 30 minutes to get the first 3 or 4 guns. Maybe a little bit longer. I might be underestimating the first couple of levels. And I guess it would also depend on the difficulty you select. But within the first hour, you're basically in the game. But you're still fighting very basic enemies at that point. So you're not really fighting the full breadth of the bestiary that is being levied against you. So finding a way to properly put that together and properly experience that, I mean, you still have to invest a little bit of time, because it's not one of those games where you're procedurally learning strategies as you go. There are some, not really gimmicks, but like the way that the level design is laid out in the early stages is not really going to be the same way as in the later stages. So there's not as much lateral transition between like, oh, I learned a skill in mission 1 and I can apply that in mission 5 or whatever. So it's not always the same thing. And obviously, since you're going to be using and upgrading new weapons as time goes on, your strategies are then going to evolve. And a lot of the weapon upgrades, by the way, don't actually improve it's not like it improves the utility in the way that you were using that weapon before. It like completely changes how you interact with the weapon. Like, there's an upgrade that gives your rifle a scope, which obviously is like aiming down sights with in Call of Duty or Rainbow Six Siege or whatever. So it's like completely different gameplay loop than just shooting the gun normally, as you have been up until the point where you get the scope. So it makes the game play, I mean, I'd say it makes it a lot easier, but it also makes the game play a lot more different, and in a way that completely changes, regardless of whether or not you think the game is made easier by it or whether you think the mechanical skill ceiling is lowered or whatever. The end result is still a different game than what you were playing before, essentially, when it comes to using that particular weapon. And the reason why this is a big deal is because of the fact that when you are upgrading weapons and progressing in some way, you'd think that your skills would transition further. And so this is another like inconsistency you have to look past in order to enjoy the gunplay. The gunplay and the controls and the finesse of the way that you're able to move around the map and stuff, and the fact that you move at a pretty high speed, all this stuff is really good and nice. And I wish that more shooters would take cues from this and do more stuff like that. But without all the extra junk, that makes it really hard for me to properly enjoy my experience. Because at the end of the day, you're still in a situation where essentially you're dealing with a shooter that is also clunked up with all of these RPG or ARPG progression mechanics and points and other things. And of course, the QuickTime events that completely destroy any sense of like gameplay flow, because even though they try to make the animations really smooth and snappy and quick, it's really jarring, and obviously it's something that you do like several times every few seconds, or sometimes like multiple times in a second, depending on how fast the gameplay is going and how easily you're dispatching your enemies. So this is a situation where you're dealing with elements of gameplay and of course elements of like UI and UX that are inhibiting your ability to enjoy the only redeeming qualities of the entire experience. So that's something that I would definitely like hearken people against. If you're interested in like developing a game, or you're trying to design something in any capacity, making it consistent is pretty important, as demonstrated by the fact that there's not very much consistency in this game. But also making it so that you don't have your audience doesn't have to do an undue amount of work just to enjoy the stuff, or ignore negative things to enjoy the positive things about your product. So that would essentially be the bulk of my criticism there in one small package. And I'm waiting for Mesk to come back and give me his small package, but alas. Lollies. Well, I'm gonna go to the bathroom.
You went after that because I had to run, but
No, that's no problem. I was just talking about, well, at first I talked with the chat a little bit about how uh, somebody was saying that they weren't able to play it on ultra settings, but unfortunately, since this is a console port, those settings don't mean anything, so it's not really like they missed out on some end result.
Yeah. So I recorded it on the highest. I played it in Vulkan. There was no performance or graphics difference between Vulkan and OpenGL, so it really didn't matter. The game is indeed a console port. It's from the Xbone. It looks like a console port. It is all screen space. The screen space shit in this game is absolutely fucking bonkers. It's nuts.
I can't actually remember if we've talked about screen space before, so if you want to give
I've
a
ranted
quick,
about it at least one occasion, but
just a quick rundown, then that's fine.
so screen space is what its name implies. It's post-processing based on the screen. So in some cases, it's quite useful. For example, G-buffer stuff, or things related to, like, for example, subsurface scattering. So what subsurface scattering is, it's like if you hold a grape or your finger to a flashlight and the color changes behind it, that's what subsurface scattering is. So that's really useful. However, screen space is used for not very useful things too. Like, for example, FXAA. So FXAA is a post-processing filter, and it blurs the image. It's pretty much legendary for just being a blur filter. But that's the anti-aliasing solution everything uses because it's cheaper and easier to implement rather than actually having a real anti-aliasing solution. This kind of dials all the way back into the major flaws of deferred rendering in general. See, way back in older titles when we were using forward rendering, we had plenty of perfectly functional anti-aliasing solutions. And that isn't to say that deferred rendering doesn't have perfectly functional anti-aliasing solution, it's that people are too scared to use them. Bizarrely enough, Blizzard is actually one of the few companies that still supports proper anti-aliasing solutions in World of Warcraft, of all things. So it's kind of unusual. But in most cases, you're stuck with FXAA. So you know how, like, old console games for, like, the PS3 and stuff, they look really fuzzy and blurry and just, like, low res? Two reasons. Yeah. One, they're upsampled. Like, for example, Dark Souls, you're playing it at, like, 720 or whatever. You're upscaling from, like, 480 at the absolute best, sometimes even smaller. So it looks terrible. But also FXAA, it's a blur filter. So enter newer generation titles. Most notably in New Doom, when you are in Hayden's office and he's talking to you about, like, the Helix Zone or whatever it is.
Oh yeah, the 10-hour cutscene.
Yeah. If you look at his fucking rug, there is ghosts that endure up to 10 seconds plus. Because something is fucked with the shader they're using for the rug and everything else. There's nothing special about it. It just ghosts like crazy. So that's the first and foremost. So, but you'll notice this everywhere. A big one that you've seen for quite a few years is SSAO, Screen Space Ambient Occlusion, which basically shades around things to give fake point shadows. It looks like garbage. In New Doom, it gives everything this kind of glowing halo around it, because the darkening effect is not pixel perfect. So you have, say for example, your gun, and then no shadows for a couple pixels outwards of the surface, and then darkening from the point shadows. It's also really inaccurate because it doesn't take into account distance. It's not based on the picture in terms of, you know, rendering depth and stuff like that. It's just based on the picture as a still frame. So you don't really have any advanced major edge detection that's going to be accounting for the fact that you're actually near a surface in which you would cast a shadow or whatever. So everything looks like absolute garbage. Screen space ambient occlusion in pretty much every iteration has been terrible, except when it's extremely subtle, which is not most games. Take, for example, Lords of Game Testing. I have if I had access to it right now, I'd post it, but I actually have some, I do have some screenshots I can put in chat for you from New Doom. So also very prominently is screen space reflections. So anybody who's played World of Warcraft knows well that if you're on a flying mount and you're got your camera sort of horizontal and you're going along a river, everything looks completely, utterly fucked. Welcome to screen space reflections. Screen space reflections are basically reflections that are not reflections. Basically, when deferred rendering was created, people just decided that they can't handle reflections anymore, even though planar reflections were kind of like tried and true and forward. Even PlayStation 2 had plenty of pretty decent planar reflections on it. Well, in New Doom and any other game, there's the infamous screenshot from that shitty GTA clone Watch Dogs of someone having their ultra settings on and they're standing in front of a mirror surface and there's no self-reflections. Well, that is because, yeah, even if you could reflect that, it would look like absolute garbage on screen space. This is the thing, though. It isn't just that screen space stuff tends to be really ugly and low accuracy. It's also very, very, very slow. So a newer anti-aliasing solution that came up particularly with Unreal 4 is called temporal anti-aliasing. And temporal is another word for screen space. Temporal takes a couple of frames of the same image and jitters them about half a pixel or so. And then it gives you the end result of overlapping those. So it's like a blur filter. And it's not fast. So you get ghosting. So in New Doom, whenever you've got your gun out, especially like the minigun or the shotgun, anything with like smaller nozzles, that's really easy to see. If you just glide your gun across any surface that's relatively bright and slightly reflective, like most of the metal areas, you're going to see ghosting. That's not your monitor, that is actually the game. So everything in that game actually ghosts like crazy. So it looks really, 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 really bad. So you've entered this bizarre situation where you've got all these cheap post-processing solutions because people are too lazy to make the graphics actually look good. And console hardware is so garbage they can't just throw their unprocessed TurboSquid crap on it. So the name of the game is to obscure it as much as possible.
Yeah, I actually talked about this while you were gone, how there's like 4 or 5 different layers of post-processing.
New Doom by default has a whole ton of cancer enabled, including film grain, lens dirt, and the daddy of all brain damage, chromatic aberration. Why would you implement this shit into a game if not to distract from it? That is entirely the purpose, is just to distract from it. Fucking photographers and, you know, camera companies and all these people spent untold amounts of money and years and years and years of research to remove these defects because they are migraine-inducing and destroy images. And now game developers just toss them in to hide from the fact that their assets look like absolute garbage.
Well, if the players have a headache and feel nauseous, then they won't notice how shitty our game looks. It's simple marketing.
And the audio for New Doom really plays into that because nothing is more headache-inducing than the fucking loudness war doubled by Jay Wilson's chin.
Yeah, you mentioned that you weren't very impressed with the soundtrack for this, and I think that outside of the game, it actually is pretty enjoyable to listen to. But I think
crunched.
Inside the game, much too crunched. Well, I don't know if it's still crunched outside. I think you had said that you listened.
Hang on, I'll keep talking. I'll find you an image.
Okay, and so one of the things that I remember thinking is that when they use it in the game, like you'll have like one enemy that's like hiding in a corner somewhere because their AI doesn't work properly, and you'll still just be listening to like full-blown death metal.
I was listening to full-blown death metal for 15 minutes until I killed myself because a fucking death sequence or something didn't trigger and I couldn't actually progress through the game because the door wouldn't open after a fight.
That's your fault, actually. Has nothing to do with the developers.
I played too good, man. I killed stuff too fast.
Yeah, you're supposed to be way worse.
Man, the enemies in that game, other than the reskinned Hellguards, the Balrogs, that will lead you, unlike most of the other stuff, pretty much nothing in that game is actually threatening, except for the shield guys.
Yeah, the shield guys fucked me up when I played the first time.
They only really will take damage from certain weapons, specifically rockets behind them.
Yeah, you're supposed to just use the shotgun nuke area, whatever that area of effect thing is.
Yeah, otherwise I would just like dump like hundreds of rounds in their shield to see if you can actually take it down. Well,
doesn't look like
maybe the BFG can take it down up front, but
yeah, that
you can't actually just up front destroy their shield. And they will just instantly kill you too. They do the highest damage as well if you get close to them. So.
Oh wow.
Because they have like shotguns or something.
Yeah, I didn't feel like the game was very challenging, even on that ultra-violence difficulty. Which again, really hardest available difficulty at the start of the game. So.
I thought like when you first unlock the chainsaw, I thought, okay, We're probably in a tutorial area. Managing ammunition is going to be a big part of this game because you're getting handed so many weapons and you don't have to deal with reloading. So you're probably going to have to use the chainsaw to deal with, low ammunition. Well, that never happened. I basically just stuck to the Gauss cannon and the rocket launcher with remote detonate because that thing is just ridiculously overpowered.
I don't think I ever used
just went through the entire game once I had those 2 weapons with that.
Gauss cannon siege mode's basically broken though. One shots most enemies.
Yep. It's ridiculous. And then the bosses. So the
all 2 of them?
Okay.
I guess there were 3 technically.
Yeah, the spider was okay. It was easy as hell. And the WoW guys were pretty easy too. But they were like, okay, I guess, just buggy. The Cyber Demon was really badly designed. The game went from being like, ho-hum, this is kind of lame, to being like Diablo 3 tier bad at the flip of a switch as soon as you go into the Cyber Demon. Because of the indicators, the super, super jittery laser indicator that is basically worthless to follow. The fact that he will just happily shoot his anime blades behind him if you're trying to go around him. They'll just magically go behind him and kill you anyways. And yeah, the whole fight, like, it's just like a bullet sponge just to be a bullet sponge, and nothing about him is engaging whatsoever. And there's fucking indicators on the ground. It's just like playing StarCraft 2 or Diablo 3 or some other shit tier game. In a shooter! You really shouldn't even have time to look down on the ground and make sure you're not standing in a fucking indicator. Who fucking would put indicators into a game, much less a shooter? It just boggles the mind.
Well, somebody probably complained he was too hard without the indicators.
I mean, there's ways he can do reads without using indicators. The ability is he shoots rockets up in the air. It's literally copy-pasted off the Archangel from Heat of the Swarm. Well, just have missiles fall down and tell the player to not stand at them because there are missiles falling down. Oh, new age game design, boys! No, let's just give them indicators on the ground so they don't have to stand in the indicators. No other place in the game uses that at all. It was really just shoehorned in the last minute, probably because some focus tester complained.
Yeah, that's my suspicion anyways.
Why is finding this so difficult? Sometimes it doesn't pay to have like 3 different hard drives your music is stored on.
Are you getting a screenshot of like the frequencies or something?
Yes, I want to get a screenshot of the frequency range on these because they are smashed. The audio in this game is fucking obliterated. If the loudness war is just absolutely ludicrous. Now, anybody who's familiar with Blizzard will know well of what I'm talking about. It all started for Blizzard way back in the Mist of Pandaria trailer when they had Metzen talking. They decided to take his voice and just smash the low range into the mid range so that they can flatten it out and boost it up. And it turns into this very, very unnatural sounding mess. And after I started using my tablet to play phone games, I realized what it is all this shitty post-processing has been gunning towards. It's to make audio sound like it comes from a fucking tablet. Because none of the audio has any bass to it at all. But what I've noticed is that a lot of speaker systems now just turn mid-range into bass. That's actually like a feature. Because so few things actually have low range. Because low range is really loud without actually being perceptibly very loud. So it tends to occupy a lot of the waveform and the frequency range and there's a better name for it. I can't really think of what it is, but it occupies a large amount of the data without actually really being perceptibly very loud. And something that isn't perceptibly very loud doesn't really catch attention. So of course you're familiar with the television. Commercials and ads and stuff tend to be much louder than a feature presentation to force your attention onto them. That's, basically falls into the whole marketing thing. And that just translated into music and everything else, where now you have... Is this the right folder? I see Deep Dark Fantasies.
Deep.
I see a speedrun. Oh yeah, the speedruns of Doom, where you can kill sequence and decollide yourself through the wall. Why is finding this stuff so difficult when I need it now? So...
You'll find it like 2 podcasts.
The sound design in general is very bad. None of the guns have any iconic sounds to them. None of them really sound that powerful. None of them are really catchy. None of them are memorable whatsoever. Now, this is not a problem specific to New Doom. It's been a problem with shooters ever since about Battlefield 2 or so. That's when I really noticed it. Basically, every shooter I played after Halo, PC, and UT 2004, the guns and stuff just really didn't sound powerful. They didn't sound really iconic. And they usually didn't sound very realistic either. And with New Doom, basically everything is just overcompressed to fuck. So someone actually who does music described to me the process of what they probably did for the guitar in this game to make it sound so weak. And let me see if I can find his notes for you, because that was actually... So... New Doom does what's basically called the mid-scoop. And equalizing the presense and air frequency ranges up to absurd level, compressing it, then raising more, then compressing again. Some other precision cuts done on all the elements. You probably know this is isolation. Well, if you overdo it and also overdo your compression, you get Doom 2016, where you can barely tell anymore what kind of instrument is being played, because all the character of the extended range guitar/bass, guitar/whatever he uses for that low first octane guitar stuff is being filtered out. The guitar tone itself sounds like he just uses not just a tube screener, but also an equalizer pedal at the preamplifier stage. And not one of those modern EQs either, but a full 15 dB range shift. So, all this, if I can fucking find the thing, I'll show you what this actually looks like visually, so you know what the hell all this turns into. But for some reason, I've either moved files or something, because I'm not finding fucking anything. But, you know, with Thrall's voice and then Kerrigan's voice, you probably noticed there was a very big difference in Heat of the Swarm between the cinematics and the actual in-game processing for Kerrigan. How the cinematics and stuff sounded overly smashed and mushed, whereas the in-game stuff tended to sound more correct.
Yeah, I just chalked that up to inconsistent lazy Blizzard, but I guess that makes sense.
It's because they have two different people doing it. So I'm going to show you a couple screenshots here. This is from a game rep from New Doom. The first one here is just going to be the normal waveform.
Normal you, actually. Did Canadia's internet cut out?
No, I'm here.
Oh, okay.
I'm just processing some stuff in XN view at the moment.
N.
Happy birthday, Necron.
Yeah, you got to play his birthday map
So
yesterday?
the other thing, of course, is they have a lot of really annoying stingers in this game that play when you do quick time events. The worst areas, I can't recall them off the top of my head, but there's two areas in the game where they're just playing incredibly high, shrill effects. There's also a lot of very, very high frequency noise that sounds like tinnitus. And I don't know if that's how you pronounce it or not, but that's how I have
ear
that
ringing.
really bad. Yes. And it drives you up the fucking wall. Well, that's what a lot of ambient sounds in this game is like, because a lot of stuff just tingles at these really, really like absurdly high frequencies. And yeah, it's actually really, really unpleasant. So I'm not actually sure which track this is. I just grabbed some random track, but you can see how everything is really, really hard cut. Like the peaks and stuff are super hard cut and they're really, really dirty looking. That is because they have been smashed. Someone took a sledgehammer to this over and over and over again, ramping up the volume, crushing it down with compression, ramping it up again, crushing it down with compression, over and over and over and over and over and over. Some parts of the game are worse than others. What this particular sound effect here is it's a series of I don't know how you'd call them. It's like a bunch of clicks, basically, and a bunch of high-pitched beeps. And that's the music, is clicks and high-pitched beeps with some grunginess. So that noise you're seeing there is the grunginess. There's all kinds of different frequencies being used here, but they all occupy the actual same volume ranges. because they're all kind of smashed together, which makes it really, really noisy and dominating. Now, there's problems with it just beyond the fact that it actually sounds really unpleasant to the ears, and that is it makes the sound stage very noisy. So one of the problems I noticed in New Doom later on in the game, when I started getting more and more careless and just kind of like trying to go through the game as fast as possible, is I noticed that there's actually no sound cues for 90% of the things in the game. You can't hear things moving, you can't hear things attacking, you can't really hear things hitting you or going up behind you. There was a couple times where I would turn around and I was actually stuck, because one of those huge Balrogs was actually just like on top of me, and I had no fucking idea he was there at all. They probably make a sound when they're attacking, but it gets lost in all the soundstage because everything is so heavily compressed, they all mesh together in this noisy morass. It's like taking a JPEG and compressing it over and over and over and over and over and over and over again. You just stand up with this tons of lost details, and that is effectively what's happening with the audio. Because the audio and all of its distinctiveness and character has been lost by being compressed so many times, it just turns into a noise. And I don't mean like a pleasant noise, like some industrial-style music. I mean just compressed for the sake of making it sound like a tablet speaker. It just sounds really bad. And the game audio is like that too. So because they all occupy the same kind of frequency ranges, they all kind of get lost and muddied amidst each other, and you lose a lot of character. I'm pretty sure anybody listening to this, if I showed you just a sound sample with music and audio from a battle in StarCraft 1, you would probably be able to pick out just about everything that's going on. It's largely commercial CDs and stuff, but it's all distinct, and most of them do not occupy the same parts of the soundstage. Well, a new problem in all these newer, her definition, Americans anally encompassing AAA garbage, you've had the complete disregard for soundstage, because nobody actually hires sound engineers anymore. It's all about trying to make it her definition and as loud as possible to catch as much attention as possible. Well, they've succeeded in that by making it very noisy. Very, very noisy. And I think this is a problem with the visuals in games like Doom as well. So, Doom has very, very low resolution textures, but what they do have is a lot of noise maps and a lot of screen space reflections. And they try to break up the inaccuracy of screen space reflections and the various probes that screen space reflection uses, because that's how they capture information, is by spherical and square probes and stuff like that, because they're not like really reflecting stuff. They try to dirty it up, and you end up with a lot of contrasts. This brings us back to StarCraft 2 and the specularity. There's a lot of noise, a lot of visual noise. So you can actually have games like Vermintide 2 is like this, where their texture resolution and stuff like that is actually quite high. But it doesn't make the image more distinctive. It actually kind of works against it. Kind of ends up looking really bad. And this brings us actually back to, I think, a very early podcast where I discussed Lineage 2 visuals versus World of Warcraft, where Lineage 2 is significantly higher detail in all the characters and stuff, but they're also much more distinctive. So they tend to use that increased real estate much more efficiently. Whereas a lot of games these days apply what is called a detail normal map, which is like a tiling or at least a very high resolution normal map on top of an existing normal map to give the illusion of high detail. Unreal Tournament 2004 actually does this quite a bit, and so does Unreal Tournament 3. Unreal 2004 doesn't have normal maps, I don't think, but it did some other trickery like that. Unreal Tournament 3 does that a lot, though. And it's what gives it the illusion of having high detail when it really isn't, is those noisy normal maps. But it adds grain. It adds much noise to the image. And audio raids are just as important as visual raids. And audio raids are a total mess within Doom because of nothing being distinctive. It brings us back to StarCraft 2 and the Zerg. You can't compare a Zerg in StarCraft 2 to StarCraft 1 because the Zerg in StarCraft 2 don't have anything distinctive about them whatsoever. In fact, half of StarCraft 2 is just using copy-pasted and slightly edited at the absolute best, if not outright copy-pasted sounds from other areas, including basically all Terran impacts and explosions are all basically using the exact same sounds, which, again, are overly compressed and overly dominant. So you can't just like tell at a glance through your ears what's going on, and some people do in fact register audio cues before visual ones. So this is something you need to pay attention to, especially in a shooter where your field of view is rather small. Having the soundstage set up very correctly is important. But Doom is fucked up, and beyond just that though, the actual 3D positioning for the audio is also severely messed up. For example, in one part of the game, there's an elevator that's stuck because there's a body on one side of it, but the sound is actually emitting from the center of the elevator and has nothing to do with the position of the body whatsoever. There's lots of fucked up stuff like that. There's lots of audio arbitrarily panning back and forth just to be irritating. It causes lots of issues if you're trying to read things by hearing. So you kind of can't really trust your hearing within New Doom, and actually the audio really tended to give me a headache. And I do a lot of noise audio myself. I created the Harry Potter BDSM Fanatic albums, which are basically all noise, in which I just stack compressors on top of each other, and it still doesn't sound as fucked up as Doom's music does in the sound effects. So this loudness war stuff is actually really retarded, because I do agree that there was certainly potential in the soundtrack. I think it's really simplistic, which I think was their goal. Their design goal is to make it simplistic. But I think it would have sounded a lot better if they didn't crush it so much. Like, when you're looking at these two waveforms up in there, it's a series of clicks and beeps. Like, it's not even music. And in the environments, clicks and beeps can mean fucking anything. So the direction was fucked up in addition to, like, just the post work as well.
Yeah, well, the soundtrack was initially pitched to this guy. The Bethesda came to him and said that they didn't want any guitars. So he came up with some weird alternative shit. And then he was like, well, let's just do guitars anyways. And they were like, okay.
Yeah.
So there wasn't really a cohesive direction to begin with.
Yeah. Apparently, it just fell apart because Carmack left them, and he was the only person who knew how the engine even worked. And now you have a game with some of the most fucked up physics I have ever seen.
Oh yeah, the physics are pretty hilarious. Like, I never noticed that if you just melee any body, it starts headbanging.
There is a part where I melee a body and all the limbs stretch out to the full extent, and it just glides across the ground. There is a part where I kill a guy with a shotgun or something, and his upper half just casually glides across the level. There's several parts where bodies just spring into the air like in Vermintide 2, like torpedoes for no provocation whatsoever. And at least half the enemies that kill in the game just proceed to collapse into their own assholes.
Yeah, they were raising the upper into the lower. The lower into the higher or whatever.
It was fucked, man.
Well, you saw the inside of Tony's maw.
I tasted of Tony's pizza. I tasted the thigh juice.
Yeah, Tony's whole family is in that game. Because Tony himself is obviously the cyber demon guy who's like the big fat dude. Who's actually surprisingly agile since he can jump like 100 feet in a single bound. I don't know how that happens.
He uses grease.
Yeah, he's grease propelled.
He just greases up the air and just slides through it whenever you see something edible.
Yeah, he's responsible for licking all of the rocks and other 24x24 textures.
Yep. It is amazing how deferred rendering. You can make rocks in it not look like they've been taste tested, but nobody seems to know how to do it.
Nope. Who else of Tony's family is in there? You got Tony's dad, who's the dog.
Those dogs look straight out of World of Warcraft.
They're Pinkies from the original Doom, LOL.
They look nothing like any of the other units in the game. In fact, most of the units in the game just don't look threatening at all, but the dogs in particular, when you play the kill sequence and you take off that horn, it looks like a pencil eraser. Just a giant pencil eraser. You can't imagine killing anything with that, and you just stab him in the eye and he just dies from that.
Yeah, I also like when you rip his tail off and then beat his head with his tail. Like, that doesn't look like it would kill anything, but yet it does.
Yeah, there's no force behind it.
There's
you
no
like
impact,
gently slap him with the stub of his tail.
Yeah,
it's just like,
oh,
XD.
Yeah, but why would, like, ripping off the tail would do more damage than smacking him in the face with the tail afterwards? I don't get that. It's so weird. Like, of all the things that you could do to kill a dog, you rip its tail off?
They're really just grabbing for straws. They had to have some kind of edgy cinematic experience for all the...
It's one of the longest animations in the game, too. All the Tony-related animations fucking suck. Like, when you're, like, you're taking Tony's pizza from his stomach and stuffing it down his throat. It's really long. It takes so long.
Yeah. It's just all shoehorned in to make it look edgy for some reason. I just don't know. Like, enemies drop health without you QTEing them.
Yeah, that's only if you're low on health, though.
Yeah, after a point, it's better just to line them up with the Gauss cannon and kill them.
Yeah.
It's safer. And you just, like, wonder why... Because a quick time event rips you out of the game pacing every single time. Like it does in every other game, except this is an arena-styled shooter in which if you stay still, there are some attacks that'll strip off like almost 100 HP on a hit. So you get into the really murky territory of either trying to iframe stuff or dying because you're coming out of an animation you can't move in. And it's just opens up a whole bunch of stupid balancing shit that you never would have had to deal with if you didn't have some asinine QTE system stuffed in. The game is also far too long. Far too long. All of the enemies basically are the same. You just circle strafe or backpedal and murder them. It's the easiest shit ever. Nothing changes. And I died a little bit, like a lot less than I really should have, considering I haven't really played a PC shooter regularly since the Bulletstorm and AVP recordings, I guess. So, like, a long time. And I died when I got careless. And
Wait, you played Randy Pitchford's Masterpiece?
And I still was in that game for close to 12 hours. And it felt like the game went on for like 8 hours too long. It was just all grind. Because there was just like no content. Like once you had played like 10 minutes of it, you'd basically seen everything the game was going to give you. Because the new weapons didn't really add anything. They just got increasingly more and more overpowered. Once you hit remote detonate rockets with that splash increase, you basically could wipe out half a room with just rockets alone. And at that stage, the game was just like insanely trivial so long as you were actually paying attention to where you were backpedaling to and you weren't getting hooked on big men. But most of the fights weren't like long enough to deplete much of your ammunition, and you were always given full refills after every single fight. If you really,
and you
really
always had chainsaw.
Yeah, if you were in a tight spot, you just chainsaw and instantly kill it, whatever. Anyways.
Yeah, the fact that it's an instant kill and also it refills all your ammo is kind of goofy.
It's kind of like when I first got the chainsaw, and I killed something with that, and I saw him just spew ammo. I was actually just speechless by what I was saying. I was just like, this puked out a whole fuck ton of ammo for weapons I don't even have yet.
Testing.
Like, no one tested their game. No one.
Well, I guarantee that was tested, and people were just like, yeah, whatever.
It's something that shouldn't ever happen.
No, it's fine. It's a little teaser.
Why is killing?
Oh, I can pick that ammo up later.
Intern in the first 10 minutes of the game drop fucking BFG ammo and shit.
Gives you rockets.
Yeah, plasma, rockets, God's rival. I just see a whole bunch of shit on the board, and they all glow super brightly, like you're playing like Second Life or something.
Yeah, well, the fact that everything glowed in that game, including enemies, was pretty retarded to me. Like, I don't know. Like, I was talking about this too, in the while you were AFKing. One of the things that I mentioned is that there's a lot of stuff that the player has to do, like, to go this roundabout shit that the player has to do in order to actually enjoy the gunplay. And it's like you have to avoid the QTEs, which later on isn't really that big of a deal since, like you said, you can just line people up in a room. And then you have to not use certain weapon attachments. Like if you use the scope on the assault rifle I saw, and that changes, like it's a different game when you're using the scope. It's like literally a different game.
Yeah.
So you're making it so that your upgrade and progression system isn't even allowing you to transfer skills between upgrades most of the time, or at least some of the time. So it's like, oh, this skill I learned when I was learning how to use this gun is now no longer necessary because I have a broken way to like play the game now in a way different way, regardless of whether or not you think it's like an easier skill area or whatever. Like it's less skillful to use the scope, which I think it is, but even if that isn't the case or is like, that's irrelevant because it actually changes the gameplay pattern you use to interact with the game when you're using that tool. So it's like not consistent in that regard. So you have to like avoid certain weapon attachments, which is already stupid, avoid certain rune combinations, which is also dumb. And like, there's all this stuff that you have to do.
To the runes after some point. Yeah. I did a challenge when they came up. I just left the first ones I got on, which was the pickup range and something else. And the pickup range actually gets kind of fucking retarded when you upgrade it, because I was just picking up health from like all the way across the map. Like when I get to the stage where I'm on that second boss, the Lightforged Paladins from Black Temple or whatever,
Yeah.
there's like the whole arena is just covered in health because they basically never hit me until later in the fight when the two of them are up and one of them touches me and I just instantly go back to full health from half. And then the health isn't even anywhere even near me because it doesn't decay. It's just sitting on the ground. And as soon as I get low, I just suck it up again because the pickup range becomes like 10 meters or close to it. And it just turns into absurdity. While I appreciate that they didn't do a fucking talent point RPG system like new God of War does, they really didn't think through some of the attachments in this because some of them are just insanely strong. Like the remote detonate on the rocket is by far the strongest. Because that radius is way bigger than what the graphic says it is. It's fucking huge. And if you unlock the master thing for it, you actually get double hits on it, which I didn't. Because I just fired it just to kill things individually. And
isn't the master thing to kill like 5 things at once or something?
I don't know. It was to kill a bunch of things at once in a like several times. And I never felt it was necessary to do that because it was just so stupidly strong on its own.
Yeah.
And the Gauss cannon. The other thing about this game that makes it really easy is there's some kind of hidden auto aim thing going on, and the hit collision for the projectiles is super generous. So
well, it's a console port, so
yeah. Particularly with the Gauss cannon, it felt like it was way more accurate. I used to do competitive Halo PC, but that's a game where competitive in it is basically you're winning the Special Olympics at autism, because every single the best servers you had to lead by 3 player spaces ahead. So it's more like you were better at abusing the fucked ass netcode than other people was. But that was years ago. I shouldn't have been doing as well with this game as I was. And I was landing a lot of the shots with the Gauss cannon I really shouldn't have been because the collision was just so huge on it. And there's one point where I'm trying to snipe something past a wall with a plasma rifle, and the bolts are just hitting the wall above me because the collision is like 3 or 4 times the size of the actual ball.
You're trying to tell me that the game gave you bigger balls and you're complaining? The game doubled your balls?
It doubled my balls, doubled my chins too, doubled my chromosomes.
How ungrateful.
It's like they had the basis for what could have been a good game, but nobody in their company actually plays games. And since they were published by Bethesda, who is only capable of making Home Alone in its various iterations,
I've never played that game.
They were under pressure to make a good game. What?
Never heard of Home Alone.
You've never heard of Home Alone? That's Bethesda's leading title. It's a very good game. You should emulate it. You should do an LP. I think it's for the NES.
I'll add it to the list.
Here, let me find it for you. I'll find it on Google. I'll see if that's what it is.
So you've mentioned that we've both essentially said that the game is in a position where you have to do too much, like it's asking too much of the player in order to actually get at what's good about it. And so even though there's like some of this diamond in the rough nonsense, it's not redeeming its own, like it's not really redeeming itself, you know? Obviously it has way too much shit that's like falling short. And so obviously, like one of the obvious things that I would say is like remove the QuickTime events and just make it so that, you know, landing more skillful shots against enemies, usually headshots, but whatever, you can find some other shit to do, is all you need to like make them drop health. And that way you're promoting like being good at the game, at what the game actually is, as well as not falling into the trap of using a QTE or a cover system or something for your like mid-game loop or whatever. But like what else do you think should, I mean, I guess like all the RPG shit should probably just be axed, and then, you know, you figure out ways to just maybe have the weapon upgrades be not necessarily Easter eggs, but I guess you could do something similar to like what Castlevania's early games do, where there's like items scattered around, but you'd probably just like find those as part of the story progression or whatever, I guess.
The game kind of reminds me of Bulletstorm. Bulletstorm had some really strong points about it. I like their weapon design, I like their voice acting, I like their writing. But then it has quick time events, things were fucking too bullet spongy. There was no diversity in the enemies again. You know, graphics and stuff were really dated. there's always shit that brings it down. It always tends to be the shit that just gets shoehorned in. It's always the shit that's just done there because, well, this other guy did it and he was successful. And it just brings the whole fucking thing down. It always just makes you really disappointed. Like, I was playing Ico. And Ico has... It's a PlayStation 2 game.
Yuko,
it's like
actually.
like the predecessor for Shadow of the Colossus. And it's a fucking terrible game. It starts off with kind of an interesting premise. The setting is kind of interesting. But then it basically just turns into an extended series of hidden QuickTime events with a lot of gotchas and shit that basically says, oh, well, you fucked this up, so now you got to spend the next 3 or 4 minutes holding your control stick and slowly crawling across everything all over again to attempt it again. The camera and everything is really, really fucking bad in that game. And hit detection, actually, for colliding with some stuff is also really terrible. And the jumping controls are really bad. It's like, these things are all stuff that could have been fixed up really easily, especially in the version I was playing, which was the HD edition. This stuff all could have been patched up, but wasn't. So you bring down what it could have been at least an okay game into turning it into what is actually one of the most frustrating games I've ever attempted. And then we look at Kingdom Hearts. That's another title. That's one I'm going to finish up soon. This title is super innocent. It's Disney hires Square to make an RPG. Okay, Square hasn't been known for making good games for a really long time, but they aren't particularly known for making absolute abhorrent trash, except for maybe Front Mission Evolved and other stuff that kind of like end up publishing. So maybe it'll just be okay.
No.
The controls and camera and boss design in this game are like, they're fucking horrible. They
Legendary.
are really bad. And like, if you're playing on the easier difficulties, then you probably won't really notice it because you'll just blindly slap your way through everything, ignoring the damage. But when you play on the higher difficulties so that you aren't getting hit for slivers of your health, you suddenly realize that nothing was actually tested whatsoever. So one of the bosses I've actually just opted to ignore for the time being. Damage just spawns on you every 3 or 4 seconds. You are underwater, which eliminates all of your movesets and stuff you've unlocked through your abilities, which is like where half of your damage comes from. The underwater control system is fucking terrible. Most of the fight, you can't actually attack enemies because you're going to get hit by that damage collision that spawns on you and strips off like 3/4 of your health. Or the boss is going to just hit you. Your allies in this game, the only thing they're actually good at doing is sucking cocks in the dirt. They are always fucking dead and doing nothing. And this fight, they don't make any effort to spawn the damage collision, which of course spawns on them too. So they just get hit by that and die and do absolutely fucking nothing. Not that they do anything in any other fucking fights anyways. Because they're autistic and drunk.
It's a combo.
So you've got to go through this boss, circling around it, spending most of your time running away, so you don't get hit by balls or nibbled on or get destroyed by the lightning that's spawning on you, even with resist gear. And occasionally attacking it, unable to commit to combos or anything of that nature because you will get hit and killed, and you don't even get your... Yeah, you're underwater, so you don't even get your normal damage collision anyways. Or your normal combo, sorry. And the spells are basically all worthless. And getting mana requires you to do melee attacks. Or burn a very limited number of consumables you can put on your quick access that you'll go through really, really fast. Of course, this is on top of all the bosses being basically walls of health. So, it's... I've played through this game before. This isn't actually my first playthrough. It's one of the few games I played years ago, and that was the normal version. This is the HD version. And I remembered it being really frustrating even on the lower difficulties. The higher, though, when the numbers get ramped up, it just... What that ends up usually doing is exposing all the really bad designs for fights in games, where when you have unavoidable damage and stuff, and it actually results, like that's usually primarily what's killing you, it just exposes that the developers never really actually gave a shit about making a fun or engaging fight, that they just wanted stuff to do damage and that was it. And there is a lot of shit like that in Kingdom Hearts.
But so it's anime and ooh. You have any idea how many people like that series just because of the characters that are involved and not because of any of the gameplay?
I don't know how anyone can fucking follow what is going on in this game. The writing is so fucking bad. It is just the
It's been
dialogue and
described
everything
to
is
me
bad.
as
Any of the voice acting that wasn't by a Disney voice actor was voiced by somebody who just didn't even put the slightest hint of emotion into what they were saying. Anytime fucking Sora opens his voice with an attack line, I just cringe out of my scrotum.
Yeah,
it's bad.
It's been explained to me that essentially it's like the worst of fanfiction.net writing a game.
See, I'm going to put a lot of this to the test because I actually intend to do that Star Fox game that spawned a lot of fanfic, and I intend to get into Sonic too. So we are going to go down that dark, despicable corridor. The Sonic 2006 compilation that Schwa ran for me. Apparently, Sonic 2006 is actually what spawned a lot of the Sonic /fic that now dominates today's internet. And having seen that game, that brings me back to Kingdom Hearts. How the fuck is anyone making fanfic and shit off of this when the actual product that you were handed is so fucking bad that you just want to scrub all memory of it from your mind? Like, I don't honestly think that hardly any more than maybe a dozen people have actually finished Sonic 2006, at least on the PlayStation 3. Apparently the 360 has a little bit better performance on it from what I've seen. But on the PS3, the performance is just... The game crawls at like 3 FPS for half of it. It's just insane. Like how, like the game, well, you'll see in the fucking videos, but I can't even put into words how fucked and unbelievably unfair that game is. That anybody would actually go through it enough to understand enough of what was going on to start shipping anything from it. But I mean,
shipping. That's like docking, but
like
less
I guess the
overt.
baby furs and stuff are like already used to subjecting themselves to extreme amounts of pain and humiliation. So Sonic 2006 is just like the natural evolution for them. Or maybe it's Sonic 2006 that turned them into baby furs and vor fetishists to begin with. Like they had already gone down the deepest, darkest corridors of existence. So all this other stuff was just like run of the mill to them anymore. They just became desensitized.
Yeah, they had to escalate it.
Like at that point, they need it to survive. It becomes their sustenance. You know how they say like weed or something like that is like a gateway drug? Well, Sonic 2006 is a gateway to autism.
I don't think it's a coincidence that every brony I've ever come into contact with knows of this game.
You know Cranny is a brony.
Really?
Yep.
I
think he
I
goes
don't
to
know if it's
conventions, too.
I don't know if it's more embarrassing that he's a brony or that he likes Michael Bay.
Yeah, that is a mashup, isn't it?
That's a toss-up.
He also told me that The Ball was a good game too, so everything kind of like fit together in this giant circle of degeneracy.
I feel like that makes him just an elaborate troll. That and
It's
he's like
possible.
working in StarCraft 2 for almost as long as Chalks has been working on it and has even less to show for it, so...
Yeah, I don't know, man. I mean, he obviously had like some skill in animation and stuff. I don't know why he didn't just work with an actual engine instead of like lopping his balls off and feeding them to gerbils all day. A little bizarre.
Yeah, I don't
A lot
know
of
if you
Disney
can
people make this very
explain that behavior.
This is really, really bizarre.
Well, what I think is more bizarre about just Doom in general as a product, as a piece of software, is that they did actually have something that felt enjoyable and felt like good. Even I would say like above average. Of course, that you have to take that in with.
It was better than most of the shooters I had played in terms of controls. That's for sure.
Well, you have to take it with a grain of salt, knowing that most, like, what the average is actually incredibly low quality, but it is above average nonetheless in that regard, and yet somehow they weren't able to translate any of the competence that was required to create something like that to the rest of the game. Like, it is bizarre to me. Like, in StarCraft 2, the most you can say is, like, some of the art doesn't look as bad as some of the other art, but there's, like, nothing else that's, like, that's basically the most you can say. Like, everything about the voice acting is dreadful. Everything about the plot and the writing. And, like, there's nothing good about... Like, nothing redeemable. It's just like, oh, I can sort of see that somebody gave a little bit of a shit in that aspect. But it would, like, you really have to go looking for that. In Doom, it's, like, jumping right out at you. But it's also, like, being fucking suppressed violently by white cops as it's trying to escape from its jail cell. So I don't know how you can draw any real conclusions from that. I know they're coming out with a sequel, but they've had less than 2 years to develop it from the launch of the first game, so...
Oh no, they're making a sequel. Oh god, I'm probably gonna get suckered into running that too.
Well, maybe it'll be shorter.
Kind of reminds me of Bethesda's other titles. They're just all such a mess. Such an embarrassing mess.
Yeah, Skyrim too.
Like, nothing about them really would be hard to actually fix. Like, Skyrim is just a recolored Morrowind, and all the old bugs and everything is still there. Everything is completely fucked. The combat system, everything like that's an absolute mess. And, you know, like, half of this can be fixed by them just evoking their end-user license agreement, stealing a bunch of mods off of Nexus that fix the big problems, and then just pushing out a patch that contains those. But instead, they make this special needs edition that basically does E&B stuff, sort of, and that's it. And then charge everybody all over again. And what's worse is that people actually fucking pay for that, too.
Yeah, that's why I think the sequel to Skyrim is actually just going to be a re-release or something.
They're making a sequel to Skyrim?
I wouldn't be surprised. That's like the big gag is they announced that there was going to be another Elder Scrolls game at E3, but they only showed like a...
Is it going to be Elder Scrolls Online 2? Because that game apparently was very good.
I don't know, man. I didn't even so much as install it.
I've seen legends of people just crawling through the world space and that left and right. Of course, this is coming from Skyrim, a game where if you tilt a horse, you can fly across the map, loading a save. Because your velocity is stored through saves.
What?
Yep.
I hadn't heard about that.
Speedrunning for that game typically involves a lot of crashing, too. Although Skyrim is just known for crashing in general, so...
Yeah. How was performance in Doom? You said that there wasn't really that much of a problem with that.
Oh, yeah. Doom actually ran really well. I had no issues with recording whatsoever in my new setup, which I expected to have issues in Vulkan because my system's very old, but I think it was more GPU heavy, which meant that I was fine because I'm using an R9 390, so... My ancient CPU didn't have any issues, though, which is kind of surprising, coming from Bethesda.
Yeah.
But it was probably using, like, an older engine that was not programmed by complete Neanderthals, so they had that advantage going for them. All the post-processing stuff was just, like, middleware, so disabling that probably gained a lot of performance I might have otherwise lost. But, no, the game actually ran pretty well.
Yeah, I mentioned while you were gone that the post-processing feels pretty stupid, like it's just tacked on, and it, much like an ultra setting or whatever, it actually doesn't offer you that much, especially since it is a console port.
It just makes it even harder to read.
Well, that's one of the other things that's really bizarre about this game is like they designed it to try to tap into the whole like bravado of being an old school shooter in a time of modern boring shooters, and it's like, okay, well, what are you going to do that? We're going to add QTEs, some stupid shit where we get like these RPG mechanics and upgrade points and stuff, and what else exactly? What are you adding? Oh, lens dirt. Okay.
You know what's funny is that when you disable the lens dirt, there's still lens dirt.
Yeah, some stuff is like that. I remember basically in every game I've ever tried to disable motion blur, and it doesn't actually turn it all the way off.
That's actually because they're trying to hide stuff. They're trying to hide ghosting through motion blur. That is actually a tactic. They also try to hide what is called fireflies, which is hotspots. It's also known as shader aliasing. And this is another excellent bug with deferred rendering. If you've ever seen a game where you encounter like pixels that turn into fucking miniature suns out of the blue, like for a frame or two,
yeah.
There's actually my mucky compilation for Dark Souls 3 that happens in there. It happens a lot when you turn off temporal anti-aliasing in Unreal 4. I'm not entirely sure why it happens, but there will be times where some shaders, some materials, will just give you a super bright pixel, and it's called a firefly, and it will turn into like infinitely bright. So if there's any bloom or anything, it can actually just cover the screen. In Last of Us, I had a bunch of white squares covering the screen for a while.
Yeah, how long is a while in this case? I mean, no length of time.
They were always there as long as you're in this one area.
Oh, okay.
They were just like, it was just completely fucked.
Isn't that a PS3 exclusive?
Yes, it's also a terrible game.
But they're
making another one.
Yeah, it's The Last of You. Like, I don't understand how they make a console game. Like, they literally only have to design for one set of hardware. How would they possibly make something like that and not catch it through testing?
Because they probably can't actually fix it, because it's just an issue with the system in general. This just comes with stuff like deferred rendering, is there's just actual limitations by the implementation, or like even like the rendering system like DirectX, which you can't actually really fix. But I don't really think that was a cause for the white squares. I think the white squares was very much on them. But stuff like the hotspots and the fireflies is
yeah, I was more so
harder to.
Yeah, I was more so
aghast. Fix that.
I was more so aghast.
That's why people throw on blur filters, because that fixes it by destroying the image and removing pixel accuracy. So blur everything; it fixes the problems. 3.
Yeah, that's like if I take my glasses off while playing a game or something.
Basically, that's pretty much what you need to do with a lot of this stuff.
Just hurts my head more.
Doom has a lot of clipping going on in it too. Also, every time you die, they have to play that animation of your body, and it's not a ragdoll, which means you're commonly just floating in the air, or in many cases, in my case, bouncing around while in a static position. So every time you die, it looks comedic as fuck.
There was this one time where I had to replay an entire mission after finishing a rune challenge, because after every single time I popped out of the rune challenge, it's 100% reproducible. I restarted my game and reloaded the quick save and all this other stuff. Every single time it gave me a checkpoint after in the loading screen for like returning to the level after the rune challenge, and I spawned in and then just levitated out of the game. I have this on recording too. I'll link it to you afterwards. It's pretty psychotic. It takes me on the same path every single time, so it's almost like it feels like a scripted event. Actually, it's really weird, and then it just kills you at the end. It's like a 10-minute carnival ride.
We were playing a game. We started playing a co-op game. It's called Scourge Project, and
what in this?
This is a third-person shooter on Steam.
Oh, okay.
And we pushed a physics box and then rubbed into the physics box, and it desyncs, and you fly into the atmosphere.
You do, not the box.
Yes, you. The host doesn't, but you do. So you probably remember, if you've seen my Hunted runs, especially the compilation with Schwa, the sheer amount of decolliding and bugs that go on in this game. Scourge Project is on that level. You can also just roll off of a box and bounce off of someone's head and immediately end outside the map space, unable to progress with the game. You can also fail the game without actually being dead.
Is this like a current game? It's been out for its release?
2014? Maybe 2012, maybe? It had an initial version, and then it got a reworked version, which is what we're playing.
Oh, so you are playing a more up-to-date version.
Yeah. And it is unbelievably fucked.
Well, it probably plays worse than the original, because I remember I was playing the HD version of BioShock 2, and nobody tested it, like, at all, because in BioShock 2, you get to become the lolly at the end, and while you're the lolly, you're like, your camera's actually, like, where your tits should be or something, so you're actually, like, you're, like, the entire time you're just clipping. Like, it's indescribable how retarded this is. Like, I don't know if there's any footage of this on YouTube, or if anybody else is familiar with what I'm saying. Like, you would actually shit yourself if you saw this. Like, this isn't a release product that was sold for money. But you are, like, it's literally, you can see, like, you know how if you go inside if you're in, like, playing Halo or something, you walk too close to another person, or you put the camera inside, like, their helmet, you can see, like, the black inside of the model or whatever. That's just you. Like, you see, like, your chin or something pre-doubling. Like, it's actually insane. Like, I don't understand how that can happen. But, like, that only happens in the HD version, not in the original, so they actually fucked something up way worse than that.
So another game I'm going to run somewhat soon is one that Steak wanted me to run, which was called Vendetta Raven's Cry. And this is also a game that is apparently legendary for being incredibly buggy. I saw a brief YouTube video of it, which had like invisible collision and shit all over the place. It supposedly was patched at one point, but it's probably still incredibly bugged. And this was a random YouTuber. I'm sure that I'm going to make this game just unplayable immediately off the bat. It is kind of amazing. All the game bugs I've broken over the years. Then there's Warframe, which is literally just like every single time it gets patched, it gets more and more fucked, and nothing in that game works correctly at all.
Yeah, it gets patched every Tuesday, so.
Hunted is also published by Bethesda, is the funny thing. That's actually the best title that Bethesda has ever published, is Hunted. But it still has a lot of problems. I'll never forgive myself for encoding that first fucking run in the wrong settings.
Yeah, unfortunately we just have the co-op one.
It's the wrong. I resized it to the wrong dimensions because I'm an idiot.
Is that why you sing Tony to yourself while playing World of Warcraft?
Yeah. Oh god, World of Warcraft. I have to finish that. I've started recording that again.
I'm sorry.
Me too. I just finished Hellfire Peninsula, and it's one of the worst zones in the game. They opened up an expansion with this absolute fucking disaster of a zone. It's just so bland and empty and so much plot devices and just garbage. Just
I don't care what anybody says. I don't think there's ever been a starting zone that's worse than that Demon Hunter area you showed me, where it was literally it was just Legacy of the Void, but like in World of Warcraft. Like, I don't understand how you can do that. They're literally calling stuff like Keystone, like fucking just Void. Oh yeah, by the way, we're like a hidden tribe of Draenei or something that have been hiding inside like the Felguard planet or whatever. What the fuck was even going on?
Oh, wait till you see all of Argus. I'm doing that at the end of my leveling. I'm doing Argus to what extent I can. I think a lot of it's probably reputation lock, but. That is where, especially if I'm going to try to do LFR for the end cinematic, this is like Legacy of the Void level shit you're going to see. Like, you are going to see Metzen's Pride and Joy before he left the company and killed himself.
Could it possibly get more Metzen than telling everybody that Tassadar was not a real character? I don't think
Reminder's really a nice guy. Well, guess what? They do that several times in World of Warcraft too.
Archimond he's just a nice, friendly pet. Just pat him on the head.
HK streamed me that, and I pretty much spent the entire time laughing.
Wait, what?
I like puking my guts out, puking rainbows.
They actually redeem Illidan?
Yep, they redeem Illidan. He's your ally. He helps you out in Argus. You spent most of Legion chasing around stuff that tells you about how he's like the chosen one and shit. And he's like really, really important to the universe, and he's gonna save everyone. And the arc ends with you. It's like Power Rangers. You know how people get really big in Power Rangers for the final showdown? Well, you have like what was it? Sargeras. He's like a Power Ranger guy. He's got like his big sword. He's gonna stab the Earth. So you yank him back down to the Pantheon, who is currently like super fat. He's like 11-1. But then he got like ganked a bunch of times, and then he started feeding, so he's not really doing too well. So he was doing well, and now he's not doing well. So you gotta like take his opponent and like shrink him down, get rid of his power armor. And then Elden is like, at last! And then fade to dark. But this is like just the tip of the insanity that you have to deal with at that stage. Like nothing in that entire fucking area makes any sense whatsoever. You're gonna love it. You're gonna just ram a cactus up your asshole, and it'll feel better than reading the text that you're gonna be reading. It's like gonna be reading to you in a sultry voice.
Pantheon's an ADC now, so.
Fantastic. People are finally picking up on tactics I did like 3 or 4 years ago. You know how pissed people get when you have like Aria Lysandra bottom lane 4 or 5 years ago? and you just do nothing but CC lock them every single time they try to CS and just instantly kill them. Or you have like Riven Xerath or Jace Xerath. There was some stupid combos we did.
Yeah, I did.
That would probably get you banned.
Yeah, now it would. Get banned if you play Singe. Just anywhere, it doesn't matter where.
You can't play this guy. He's not diverse enough.
I remember playing Fiora with Tony, the frog guy that eats people.
Lewd.
Yeah. That was a good bottom lane. Anyways, somebody in the chat, Balethal, says, don't they pull some sort of the Legion was actually protecting everyone from the Void Lords all along? Is that real?
Void. Yeah, so the Void is basically the same as it is in StarCraft 2, except it's purple. And nothing makes any sense about the Void in any context at all. Because demons use Voidwalkers in much of Burning Crusade and before.
Yeah, and in Warcraft 3.
So suddenly, Voidwalkers are from the Void, and the demons are actually timeless entities that exist in multiple dimensions at a time, trying to stop you from the Void, stop you from getting eaten by the Void, by turning everything jizzy and fell green with comedic one-liners like, you can't stop this, and it's gonna split me in two. And yeah, so you defeat, quote unquote, the demons by killing all these titans and shit, and then the Void gets grape drank in your eyes, or some shit. It gets really convoluted. Really, the big thing about World of Warcraft and pretty much any other game like this is one of the part of the storylines I'm really tackling is I want to show the difference between Nagrand and Burning Crusade, and then Nagrand and Cataclysm, or not Cataclysm. I always get confused with Warlords of Draenor because they're both basically the same thing. And Warlords of Draenor, nothing makes any sense at all. And I think in Burning Crusade, because I'm Horde, there's actually going to be some attempt at a story there involving Thrall, and I expect it to be really stupid. But
Metzen.
The thing is in order for Warlords of Draenor to make any sense at all, I guess at a hypothetical standpoint, you have to be aware of the Timeless Island, which somehow enabled these alternate dimension orcs to somehow enter your world through the same dark portal the first ones did. Which
Wait. There's alternate dimension orcs?
Yes. So Warlords of Draenor, and I guess a large part of Legion probably, has to do with something that happens in Mists of Pandaria, where there is now alternate dimensions or something. I actually don't really know because I've never seen where that fucking happens. I think it's a part of a daily quest or an event or something that isn't there anymore, because that's what I mean. I have to piece these stories together for comparison, and I don't even know where to even begin with fucking Warlords of Draenor and how that even happened, because I've done all of Mists of Pandaria and I've never seen that shit. But this is what I mean. It gets so convoluted to the point that to even like figure out why the fuck there's other orcs coming out of the dark portal and not these orcs, you aren't given even a superficial explanation for that at all. They're just there. You just hit the level to unlock that expansion, and it's like, oh hey, go through the dank portal into the other Draenor for reasons, and you're like, what? And then there's Khadgar. Khadgar becomes the new Thrall. He is like the plot device that just keeps on plotting until it's convenient for him not to, anyways.
Oh, apparently there's an alternate timeline too, not just alternate universes.
Yeah, and
Gul'dan comes back.
At once.
And Grom has a son.
Yeah, things. The whole orc thing is. I'm gonna try to get into that in the run, but it's a little. It's really convoluted.
Like, I already thought Warcraft 3's plot was fucking retarded and like really convoluted, but this is making it look like pretty straightforward.
Like, I can make sense of Blaze Blue and Fate and Kara no Kyokai or whatever. Like, those those were easy for me to figure out. And World of Warcraft is like, particularly since it doesn't really give you anything to work with, because apparently a lot of it gets resolved by third-party written works. I refuse to call that dribble novels. And I think that it's possible that some of this may involve that too. I have read one of those for StarCraft, and it was... Let's just say I'd rather read some Sonic/fiction than read that again.
Yeah, all of the Sonic novels, all of the StarCraft novels are pretty fucking bad. Like, I read the first book in the Dark Templar saga, but also apparently, like, I played this campaign that was an adaptation of a novel that was written in Warcraft 3, so it's like 6 figures removed from Warcraft 3 already.
Outsider XE.
Yeah. And in the campaign, like, there's dialogue that's like ripped right from the book instead of being rewritten or adapted or whatever for...
Well, that's what you'd expect.
Sure. And the dialogue is like Grom, this guy who like just is a retard, for lack of a better word, is like, Thrall, we must go now and make this difficult decision together as one. It's like, what? It's like, why the fuck did you write Grom like he had a college level education? It's like, there's just no understanding of the actual characters that these authors don't really get it, I don't think. Not that there's really much to give them. I can't really blame
the authors too much for that, because Blizzard didn't give them anything to work with. World of Warcraft doesn't have a story. It doesn't have a universe. It just has a bunch of one-dimensional Mary Sues and convenient plot devices. And there are probably like 2 or 3 dozen interns who died during its creation, just like puking into it as much as they could until they had no more organs to throw up, and then they threw themselves into the bucket afterwards. Like, it is impossible to write for something that has nothing to write.
Yeah.
But I guess, like, these, like, high schoolers are like, hey, this company's big, and if I get my name on the resume, it'll make me famous. So they, like, are butting at the bit to make a novel for Blizzard Entertainment and their epic story. And you just end up with basically 2 complete retards. Just, like, shoveling each other as diarrhea around and trying to make it float in the toilet bowl.
What an apt description. Well, since we're on the topic of story and shitty games, let's talk about Doom Story as our closing moment.
Doom Story.
So, the first thing I want to point out is, like, my gut reaction to you complaining that the story wasn't, like, you weren't, like, the setting wasn't being established or whatever, my gut reaction was, like, this is a fucking Doom game. Like, that really shouldn't matter. But, I think that, like, the deeper issue, right, is that some of it is played straight. Some of it isn't played presented in such a way that it's like, oh, we don't give a shit about story. Some of it's presented as if they did. And this is like the schizophrenia that's really present in the game, where you have really long text entries that I don't know how you could even read some of this stuff. Like, it's just pointless. There's no character to it at all. Like, it's just stupid. It doesn't, like, it honestly doesn't change your understanding of the game at all anyways, even if you read all that stuff. And so, not only is it, like, not engaging as a form of media, like writing, it's not, like, well written. It's in a game. Like, you don't need that shit in a game. If there's something's important that I need to know, then I don't need to go on a wiki inside your game to figure out what that information is, right? Like, you got to tell me. You got to present that information to me. And show me, preferably, not tell me. But, like, the core element of Doom's story is presented to you through, like, really arduous cutscenes, like that one mission that has simultaneously a 10-minute train ride and a 10-minute Samuel Hayden sits you down and cuffs you. Like, it's like... So the really big issue is at the beginning of the story, you have your character who's, like, breaking out of his, like, little basement dwelling area, and he puts on his suit and gets, like, fucking... has an epileptic seizure from strobe lights, and then he smashes this, like, console that's, like, trying to talk to him, and then he smashes something else and some credits roll. And it's like, okay, well, he's literally smashing the story.
And the guitar is playing. Look how edgy this guy is.
Yeah, but it's like smashing the story. It's like, oh, we don't give a fuck about the story here, guys. We're Doom. But then, like, halfway through, they're like, just kidding.
What gets me about the story for Doom is this is the thing. they try to justify stuff that happens instead of just saying it happens. And in doing so, they open up a tremendous amount of plot holes. For example, Olivia has this canister of retrovirus from Resident Evil that will open a portal to heck. And it's like, oh no, she has the one thing that can still open the portal because you disabled the array by smashing a bunch of filters that are conveniently unguarded and really, really easy to access and very easy to break for such an incredibly important and valuable device. Yes. By the way, there's a bug where when I smash one of those and you take the thing out, it just teleports back into it after the animation's finished. So Olivia takes the canister, the retrovirus, and smashes it overhead, and you get yanked into heck, and you come back. It turns out you gotta go back to heck again because you gotta find a way to close the heck portal. But you can't use that heck portal that you came out of because it's not in the Titan's realm, where Sargeras is having erotic anal sex with, I don't know, Solera of Asterion or something.
Yeah, so instead you have to sacrifice your pet robot, who you don't actually
just
sacrifice.
Conveniently, you're able to open another portal with the pet robot, yeah. But then it turns out you need to go to a third place because it's 3. You've always got to go to 3. So as it turns out, there's another way. You can just open a portal to hell. Oh, this other way happens to be a device that Olivia had access to because it was fused to a cyber demon her team was reviving. So as opposed to doing something within the safety of her own office and having access to something she already had access to, she had to pull all the red flags on the people that are hunting for her by grabbing this other thing and then being in your face half the time while you are frozen there, unable to move in your super immersive cinematic experience where she monologues to you about how you can't stop this, just like in an H game.
What? I forgot that there was a third one. That's right. You go into her office and you find this, like, not the real sword, but it's like the secret room that gets you to the sword eventually.
Yeah, so it's like it didn't need a story, you know. It's Doom game, evidently, but they decided to give it a story, and in giving it a story, they just Metzened it over and over and over and over and over again. They made a bunch of mistakes they never needed to be in a position to make, but they decided to put themselves in that position and just made fools of themselves in the process.
They also could have made a story if they wanted to, if they were competent at it, but
yeah.
Evidently, that's not what happened.
There just needed to be less plot devices. Plot devices are always the evidence of a bad writer, where it's like, I don't know how to proceed or how you could do this, so let's just conjure a convenient excuse.
Yeah, but this is like a really over-dramatic example. Like, I think this is an extreme example, actually, where you have 3 different, like, every single time you do something, it's like, you'll never be able to do this again, so make it count, and then you do it again.
And the other thing that caught me off guard is how Jason Hayden is entirely untouched by the apocalypse happening all around his office. Now, you could insinuate that because he's the CEO of this company, he has some extra defenses or something. There is nothing that alludes to this whatsoever. You're fighting some of the strongest demons in the game at this stage in the game, right outside of his office. Nothing is touched or scratched or ever even insinuated that he was in any threat when Olivia would have seen him as the biggest threat to her plans. And yet nothing happens to him whatsoever.
It's a conspiracy. He's in on the whole thing.
Well, that's evident. I mean, his voice acting is so over the top and sinister that you just know he's going to, like, betray you in the end in some way.
Yeah, well, that's why I thought it was kind of funny that they just, like, after all that, it's like, oh, I'm actually stealing the sword, by the way, thanks. And then he just walks away instead of you fighting him.
Yeah, I also like how you backed up Vega onto a flashcard.
Well, that actually triggered me more than basically anything, besides like the start and stop, where it's just like, oh, here's this sequence of events where that, because the story is more important than the gameplay, because we're a Doom game, by the way. Besides that shit, what really got me was like, there was that moment where you're backing up Vega is like the most retarded moment in the entire game. I think like the single most retarded moment, because you
have this huge fucking system dedicated to this giga AI, and you back it up into a floppy disk in a span of half a second.
Okay, yeah, the technical elements are really dumb, but consider the fact that you are a sociopathic murder machine that just wants to accomplish your objective, And the way that they present it is that he wants his pet. Well, it's like, this is fucking... Like, that is schizophrenia. Really that is schizophrenia. When he
backed it up, I was like, they're doing this for a sequel. I don't think I ever mentioned that, but it was something I just registered in the back of my head that this makes no sense, so there's obviously a plot device for a sequel.
Yeah, but like...
That's precisely what it is.
I don't know, man. They, like, why go through the trouble of, like, pretending, like, painting it in such a way where it's like, oh, no, Vega, this guy that this deep character we're attached to, is like, oh, he's gonna die. Like, there's no significance to the character death. If you fucking see him, back him up. Like, just say, like, have Samuel Hayden be like, don't worry, we have a backup. And then if you want to manufacture some fucking tension, you can just have Vega be like, Daddy, no, don't kill me. Please stop spanking me in the ass. And then he starts like pulling out his guns or something. And then it's like, oh, maybe Vega was the one who was defending Samuel Hayden. So like then you're tackling two bears at once.
Well, the thing is they're actually doing something a little different here. You know all the Rule 34 about Cortana and the Master Chief?
Oh.
Well, they are doing the progressive version. Now it's going to be Vega and Doomguy. Because they're basically just going to turn him into the Master Chief. He'll just plug this thing into his head, and Vega will walk you through surviving and fucking Tumblr hell. And you'll be just assaulted by, like, triple horse-cocked furries and baby furs and grown men in suits crying inside playgrounds and the FBI and Boxy.
Especially that last one.
And the final boss will be the Skeptics, TM, from Reddit. Yeah. They throw their fedoras at you like Oddjob from GoldenEye. Was it GoldenEye?
It'll just be that amazing atheist guy.
I forget my 00 movies now. But you know who Oddjob is. They'll throw their fedoras at you like that. That'll be the final boss.
I just hope we won't be able to... you know what? The biggest problem with Doom is that you could speedrun the game by decolliding through enemies, so I hope that they fix that in the next one.
I think they've tried to fix that at least. I heard they were trying to patch that out a while ago.
Yeah, because they don't like people being able to exploit their stupid system.
Yeah.
I don't know,
They
man.
don't like people... It's weird how they're trying to patch that out for this, but Bethesda themselves don't give two fucks. They've never touched anything in any of their other games. It's pretty hysterical because at GDQ, the hyper-progressive, hyper-diverse, super PC, you can't ever talk bad things about developers. All the people commentating on Skyrim are like, this is a very well-programmed game. And they have all got these shit-eating grins on their faces. And they just keep repeating it over and over and over and over. Skyrim is very well-programmed.
Yeah,
and
well...
You just know. Everybody knows.
That's like the biggest charade anyways, like the reason why I think it's like that's a perfect example of why like this nonsense about the social justice stuff or whatever, like that needs to go. Because you can't just have people sitting there going ha ha bad game lol, but not really, because then I'd get fired. Like that's just not okay.
It is okay in America because everybody succeeds. Everything is art. All expression is equal. That is the marketing. That is what marketing drives you to think, because then people actually start to believe that. And then the developer doesn't actually have to put effort in their work. And then you get StarCraft 2 and Diablo 3, and, you know, regardless if you like the games or not, you can't objectively say that they're better than other games. They're not improvements at all. But they're more successful because people are more apologetic towards them. And that is the mindset that drives that. Is the lack of a drive for improvement. And that is what marketing is all about. It's not just about finding a market and appealing to it. It's about shaping the market. And the video game industry is very young still. And very, very impressionable. And, you know, you're going through this generation of kind of like a changing the guard in terms of your actual market audience. The kind of people who are interested into it. Because gaming before was a niche. You know, like back in the 90s, if you were a gamer, you were generally viewed as a degenerate by the general society. So if you were someone who was willing to deal with that, then you were probably someone who was really invested into it and had some kind of standards to it, right? That's not now is those people who used to call you a degenerate now want to identify as you because now you are trending. And above all, you are where the money is at. Now there is no longer you because you have aged. And the new generation has grown up of people who are very, very hyper apologetic because they have been brought up by the other individuals who are like, hey, let's be a part of this. Let's be gamers. Let's play World of Warcraft and call ourselves gamers. Now we're a gamer. Now we're hip and trendy. But that environment didn't exist where it was secluded and niche and there was a real drive for improvement, a real drive for identity. Now it's all about mass appealing to people who want to identify as something but aren't something. You have a lot of things that are just all-encompassing brainwashing. Like you look at Doom. Doom has a lot of get-out-of-jail-free cards in it, which is, of course, the BFG. I mean, these exist in previous games as well. But there's no point in Doom where the difficulty actually really goes up. It just gets easier and easier and easier because your utility expression and stuff increases, the damage you do increases. There's some things in the game that are going to kill you, like the Cyber Demon, and it's retarded everything. And, the guy's sneaking up on you and just instantly killing you with their green fell fireballs. But in terms of its actual gameplay, the game doesn't actually get more difficult at all. There's no real thinking involved. That's pretty much the same with every single game you're going to play in like the last 10 years, is there's no real actual difficulty or engagement. But then they realize, people are going to complain the game's not hard, so let's make the numbers bigger. In the older Doom, when you increase the difficulty, it changed like even spawn rates and stuff. I think the highest difficulty in normal Doom has like infinitely respawning enemies and reduced ammunition or something like that, and finite ammunition. So I actually just kind of like need to know your way around the levels and stuff like that so you don't get starved out right away. I don't know about the numbers or stuff.
Yeah,
I'm probably not going to play on that highest difficulty, but I'll play on like the second highest difficulty.
It increases the overall number of enemies, right? So you're using the same skills that you learned to dispatch enemies in the previous runs or when you were just like learning the ropes as you are when you're dealing with more enemies. You just have to do it better because you have less surplus of ammunition versus the amount of enemies that you have to kill. So like the concept is a lot cleaner and a lot more like just like you would expect that. Like that's more expected. That's more consistent. You don't have to worry about not being able to properly like understand the invisible modifiers that are increasing HP or whatever. And unit behaviors aren't really that different between difficulties, if at all. But what is different is the fact that since they're already aggressive to begin with, which is not the case in Doom 2016, you have more of them. That means that you have more aggressive enemies fucking with you.
You notice that most games are just not very aggressive in general because that most people that they're targeting are not very intelligent. And not just not very intelligent, but they have very, very poor reflexes. We're talking like soccer moms and jocks and stuff. That's why stuff like Overweight is very, very popular because they don't really require you to actually be a good player. They usually hand you some way to succeed without actually being good. In the case of Overweight, we're talking like massive area of effect abilities and, no real consequences for dying and stuff like that. Things that really only get more heavily abused when you actually reach the upper highest echelon of players, but in most general gameplay isn't really ever going to amount to any kind of real skill expression whatsoever. And that's because that's the market that they're aiming towards. That's the market they want. The problem with Doom 16 is it's inconsistent in what it actually wants to be. Not just in like the story kind of like highlights it, where they have kind of an arcade feel, but they don't actually embrace it, and then they want something cinematic and gritty and edgy, but they don't even embrace that either. And you end up with two polarities that clash that represent that Doom doesn't actually know what it wants to be at this stage. They want to be edgy in 2016 and hyper-compressed and throw in all this post-processing look, like every other generic fucking shooter. And yet they're Doom, but they're not Doom. They want to be more like the Resident Evil movies that came out. They want that same appearance. They want that same color palette. They want that same post-processing. They even reuse some of the logos and stuff from it and some of the styling as well. And they look to those influences rather than looking back. It's kind of like when you look to DMC versus actual DMC. This is the stuff that destroys the franchise. It's not actually the old game anymore. It's just loosely based off of it. It's cargo cult. Again, look at Diablo 3 versus Diablo 2 and Diablo 1. Look at StarCraft 2 versus StarCraft 1. These are all cargo cult titles They weren't made because of the original players. They were made because of people who were aware of the original franchises to begin with. And people had kind of forgotten about them, so they thought, let's grab these people who are aware of these things, but were too scared to get into them, and make it hyper accessible so they can feel like they're a part of something big. There's a lot of, really, really nitty gritty details in terms of how that marketing and psychology works, but it's something you see that's really just sinister to its development as a body, because Doom 2016 stood to be a really good game. And the changes you can make to it really wouldn't be that bad at all. You remove the quick time events, you cut down on all the needless wandering around, you added some more monster diversity. I felt that they were too scared to explore as well. I felt that they looked at the original Doom and they felt like they couldn't do anything different than the original Doom did, particularly in the monsters, when I felt like this was a great chance to start really exploring that and add in more aggression and more different enemy types. There was potential with the enemy types they did have they didn't take advantage of. For example, the Mancubus, the big armored ones that shoot the jizz on the ground, that burns on the ground. If they use that to kind of like deny you to terrain, kind of like control the map a little bit, and had like a little bit of intelligence to try to corral you and like expose you more and get rid of the places you were like ducking around in or whatever, just like have some kind of basic intelligence to them with that ability, that would completely change the game all in itself. It would suddenly make them way more threatening and really change the dynamic of what you're doing, but they don't. They were too scared to actually explore whatsoever, too lazy. And in the end of the day, the casuals wouldn't have even really experienced those changes anyways. So they wouldn't even have felt encouraged to do so, even if it was on the table, because most people are too busy licking windows to actually play games.
Well, they did say that they are going forward with new additions to the bestiary in the sequel, so we'll have to see how those pan out and whether or not those are any good.
I'm expecting a disaster.
Yeah. Well, you brought up in your playthrough that most of the enemies, and especially in the early game, felt like generic undead. Like, you had the shield guys with shotguns or whatever, but then you have the imps that are pretty generic. You have you just have stuff that's like very, very basic. And
you notice this in most games.
Well, it just takes
Even if they don't look like zombies, they are zombies.
It takes a long time for these trash monsters to give way to or interact in any interesting way or complex, compelling, challenging way with the other monsters. And sometimes they never interact with them in an interesting way.
You also notice they basically sound the same. It's the exact same soundscape as Left 4 Dead, just more compressed. It all sounds the same. It all looks the same. It all feels the same. It all interacts the same. And you associate it. And at some point towards the mid or third quarter of the game, I'm like, it feels like I'm playing Left 4 Dead. Because it is basically the same thing. That's what it sounds like. That's what it looks like. It's just another zombie game. Because nothing actually is requiring me to think. And I get careless to the point I actually kill myself by shooting the Gauss cannon jumping over a cliff. And some other stupid stuff, because I just am not paying attention anymore, because the game is not trying to engage me whatsoever. It's just so mindless and uninteresting. It's just kite. I've done that so many times in World of Warcraft. I don't need to be doing it in a first-person shooter. There's not really a lot of ways to really engage stuff, because it's a bullet sponge and it'll do shit tons of damage if you run right up to it. There are projectiles that just will conveniently swerve 90 degrees to hit you if you're behind them. So you just learn just to kite. And, especially with the remote detonation rockets, that's like the most optimal play pattern. Nothing ever punishes you for it. Ever. So you just keep doing it because it's successful and goes through the entire game. And it's just playing a zombie shooter. It's exactly the same fucking thing as every other zombie game I played, except for Last of Us, which I don't even consider a game. It's like a glorified walking simulator with terrible writing.
How dare you? How dare you insult my waifu, Lolly? Isn't she going to be the protagonist of the new Last of Us, by the way?
Yes, and it's now a diverse, progressive fart story. They're trying to appeal to all the fetishists on DeviantArt now. From what little I've seen of it, it was some of the most embarrassing things I've ever seen to come out of the game industry in the last year or two.
Gears of War 69 also has I think it's actually Gears of War 5, which is hilarious. That's like Halo 7 or something. Gears of War 5 is going to be having a female lead as well. which is pretty interesting. And by interesting, I mean sickening.
I don't think female leads are necessarily a bad thing, but the reason why people are doing them is really bad.
Oh,
and
yeah,
it
well,
is
that's
executed terribly.
I thought that was implicit in the way that I was explaining it. Yeah, it's like the fact that nobody even develops characters in the first place with their characters in games at all, like, that's bad enough. Like, you don't have characters with these people. You just have these, like, oh, I'm a man or woman. Insert this race here. Like, that's the extent of their
terrible.
characterization.
And it always has to be about them being strong and independent from the men. It's so baity. It's just terrible.
Yeah, I was like, what are
really,
they actually
really bad.
going for in a situation like that, right? Nothing interesting, nothing original, and certainly nothing that's going to offer any substance to this particular character, so nothing meaningful. And so why are you doing it
the last
exactly?
game I played that had a good female lead was Alice Madness Returns. And there was like never any focus on the protagonist being a female at all whatsoever.
Yeah, that wasn't why.
Which is the way it should be.
Yeah. Because that's like an immutable characteristic as opposed to something that's actually going to define who they are as an individual and why they're an interesting character or why they're a compelling storyteller, right? Because I think Alice was like an unreliable narrator in that game, so...
So
that was a disaster of a game, though.
Alice Madness Returns was one of those games that had... It improved over the original, which is, you know, not hard to accomplish given how bad Alice 1 was. But the ranged combat and other stuff in that game were so fucked. Have you played that game, Alice Madness Returns?
Oh, yeah. I haven't played the original.
Okay, save yourself the pain. It's not worth it. I want you to play Home Alone, not Alice 1. I'm not that cruel. Alice 1 is the game where I had to abuse quick save to survive the centipede boss because it would telepathically kill you.
Oh.
All the fucking time. Have you watched that run?
I have not. I guess I have to add it to the list.
Go watch it. It is fan-fucking-tastic. It is, I think, the only game I've ever used quick save on. To that, at all. And it was implemented because it was a completely untested piece of shit.
Well,
and Alice Madness Returns was one of those games that was like, you know, they could have put in effort and made this really good. It's not really bad, but it's got some shit in it that is just so horrible.
Yeah, I thought that some of the monster diversity in that game was... I mean, some of it was like it was pretty hit or miss, I guess. But when it worked, I felt like it worked pretty well.
The level aesthetic and stuff like that was good. The music was good. You know, other stuff like that was pretty good. But the ranged combat and the blocking mechanism being tied to lock on and stuff like that, like the actual control system behind anything.
Oh yeah, interacting with the game was ass. But it was like the inverse problem that Doom had, I guess. But like, because when you actually got to playing not playing the game, but when you got to like looking at the composition of enemies and stuff, there was like an interesting number of ways that battles could play out if you could actually have any control over them. Yeah,
it was like 50% fighting the controls. The concept was interesting, but the execution again was really bad. I tried to play X-Blades. That was actually going to be the title I did my OBS testing on, but I got brick-walled on one of the early fights. Because there is an enemy that just indefinitely shoots fucked up fireballs at you and seems to have a absolute fuck ton of health and takes no damage from anything you do and will just destroy you if you try to fight it. And infinitely spawns ads like every other part of the game at that stage, I guess, until you do whatever. And then there was health that respawned in the previous maps, but not in this one. And you can't do any damage to him with your ranged weapons. And I don't know if there's some gimmick to killing him or not, but it feels like a really bad Unreal Tournament mod. And it is kind of hysterical, but also really, really fucked. And that game is like where Doom 2016 took its post-processing advice from. The first thing that happens when you enter the Shadow Realm is you just get blinded by one shade of bloom. So I've been really slogging through the gutter in the last while, that's for sure.
Yeah, going from Doom to what did you say you're doing next? Kingdom Hearts? That must be interesting.
I actually started that early this year in January.
Right.
That will be finished, I don't know, soonish, I guess. I think I'm towards the end. I think I am.
Well,
and
that'll be an adventure.
Echo and X-Blades and some other stuff. Haven't been really active. The Doom run is actually the first LP I've released in a year. Because of all of the shit that has gone down in that year.
Was it worth the wait for Doom 2016?
It wasn't even a wait, really. I just did it on the spot to test my new pipeline. I was like, well, X-Blades is going to turn into a fucking disaster, and I don't feel like getting really angry at this. What else can I record and throw away if it doesn't work? And I thought, oh, Doom 2016, let's try that. So I played the whole thing in like 2 sittings. And it's making a lot of people very angry because it's such a bad game. I'm getting a lot of strings of rants of people who are getting very, very angry that this is actually a Doom game, and they're trying to pass it off as a Doom game. All the older people who've actually experienced the older shooters, and some people who have just been introduced to the wonders of screen space through this title, because I do some explanation of what screen space is in the game, right, using the game, and once their eyes are open to that, it destroys them for the rest of their lives.
Yeah, you'll never be able to unsee it.
People keep asking me, why do people do this shit, and why are people who do this shit are successful? And I don't even have an answer for that. I don't know. Do people just not have eyes, or is it just that those tremendous amount of people who own Dark Souls just to own it because they play hard games, but they don't actually have any playtime in it at all? It's just it's very strange, very, very strange.
I don't think your life will be complete until you play Deadly Premonition, so.
But, yeah, that is what it is, so. All I can do is just provide my insight on which way the goat flows.
Well, final thoughts on Doom 2016?
Carmack abandoned a ship that was sinking so deep into the sea it probably ended up in China. And he's probably going to go make a Fortnite clone with Battle Royale to boot.
Doom Royale. Become your own demon.
Also, the first quote when you start the game is apparently from a really bad comic.
Really?
I guess that fits right in with Darksiders 2 that ripped Death's entire character design off of some old comic too, 1-to-1, shamelessly.
But why?
Because THQ and all of its developers were completely uncreative hacks.
No, I mean, why did they use a comic for... You mean there was a Doom comic, or they just ripped it from a comic?
No, they ripped it from a comic. I can't remember which comic. I can dig it up sometime because I have an image of it somewhere. But they people developers like Blizzard and stuff, they don't have writers or designers on their staff, so they usually just look back to try to find something really obscure, maybe something even foreign, and try to just rip stuff off of that. It's also really, really popular in the movie industry too, though, and the music. Like Burzum, for example, half the fucking metal quote unquote artists out there just rip riffs off of Burzum and Slipknot.
Okay, you combine Burzum and Slipknot.
Apparently, Doom 2016 rips a lot off of Slipknot too.
Well, that wouldn't surprise me.
They're just like, oh shit, we don't know how to make music. Let's rip stuff off of other people's shit.
Yeah, I was watching.
It's a big deal. In
I was watching a GDC talk by the composer of Doom's soundtrack, and he was like, "Well, I sent them my first draft of the soundtrack, and they said it was boring, so I made this." And I thought that was kind of funny.
I don't know, I feel like the whole process is a part of the problem as well. I doubt any of these composers are incapable of making good music. It's just the developers always seem to be so fucking detached, like willfully detached from what's going into their game. Like if I was making a game and I had hired somebody to make music for it, I would want to be in his studio while he's making it. Not necessarily like lording over what he's doing, but at least having like input in the direction he's taking, because it's my fucking game.
Right. Oh yeah,
I need to make
being
sure
aware
as a
and
designer
involved.
everything sings together, right?
Yeah. Well, apparently not.
But nobody fucking does that.
I don't know. He said that he got a lot of really positive reception when he demoed the stuff, so apparently they really liked it. So you make of that what you will. I don't know if it's like negligence as much as it is incompetence.
Probably. I mean, given the final product that has QuickTime events in it,
as a main mechanic,
that most of their staff were on meth. Just like the rest of Bethesda. Just huffing that Jenko.
God damn it, Tony. No pizza for you tonight.
Meth flavored pizza.
Wouldn't it generally be the other way around? Meth flavored
pizza flavored meth?
Yeah. Meth flavored pizza would taste horrible.
You sure? You ever tasted what comes out of Tony's thighs? That probably has a lot of extra ingredients in it. Shrooms, for example. It's probably got shrooms growing somewhere in there in those fields. They just kind of get scraped off like an extra layer of pepper, but shroomy.
Yeah, you know, they said there's this leading theory that monkeys ate mushrooms that were being grown under cow shit. And that's why we're here. We're humans that ate cow shit mushrooms. So I'm sure that the next living, like, intelligent creature will come to pass because they ate mushrooms from Tony's thighs.
That must be why white people are the master race, because mushrooms are white.
Oh yeah, good point. Yeah, I can totally follow.
That also means we're narcotic if eaten. We'll probably be seen as a delicate by the other races. We'll start being hunted and eaten.
We gotta protect our flesh.
Kind of makes me hard thinking about it. Some big burly men surging in my room with pitchforks. Gotta wrestle them on the ground, all drenched in sweat, slapping each other.
You just need regular sized forks.
No. How can you fill Tony's mouth with just a regular fork? That takes way too much energy. It's about gaining calories, not losing them.
Well,
just use a shovel. Or a forklift.
That's the kind of fork I'm talking about. Well, thank you, everybody, for joining us on today's episode. Brought to you by Tony and his fucking pizza mushrooms.
Tony cook many pizza for big man, but big man also eat Tony. Why so big?
Ooh. Happy birthday, Necron!